it's really not the interest rate that matters. It's the balance of the debt the interest rate is applied to that matters. And so if we have a way to be able to manipulate that debt from 100,000 to 50,000 to 10,000 to 1,000 really quickly, the interest rate becomes meaningless.
Welcome to the Super Clinic Project Podcast, where we take regular clinic owners and turn them into cash-based multimillionaire entrepreneurs. Warning, if you're a doctor who listens to this podcast regularly, you will make millions of dollars. Do not listen to this podcast unless you want to be a successful clinic owner who helps thousands of patients achieve their health goals and adds more money than you can imagine to your bank account. You've been warned.
Welcome. I'm Jennifer Gligoric, one of the hosts of the Super Clinic Project podcast, where we take regular clinic owners and we turn them into super clinic owners. We have a guest today who has a very diverse background. He's a dentist. He's a business owner, entrepreneur, Navy veteran, husband and dad, and his passion for math and personal finance has led him to help others like him be debt-free and happy with their cash flow. And he's got 4 boys on top of all of that. He's financially led, the ultimate cash flow optimizer. So please let's welcome Howard Polansky to the show today. Welcome, Howard.
Jennifer, thank you.
I am so excited to have you on the show. So yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, you've got 4 boys too, and you're doing all the rest of it. And that's a lot of kids. That's a lot of kids, especially when there's 4 boys.
They're all on the older side now. So it's the 2 bonus kids are 28 and 25, and the 2 biological ones are 19 and 16. So I'm almost done.
No, I'm going to tell you, I got an 18-year-old. I have a 36-year-old. Oh my gosh. Okay, I blanked out. I'm sorry, Suzanne. But yeah, it never goes. I'm going to tell you, it never goes, because then, like me, you become a grandparent. So, and then it starts all over again. Anyway, our clinic owners, they're going to be very excited to talk to you today. But I'm going to tell you, they come into our program and it takes a while because we do our accelerator program with them. And they never specifically say it in the beginning. But at one point, as we're working, they say, I just don't know where all my money goes. And that is, I think, a big thing that you work on to get them more financially led. And why do you feel that focusing on cash flow leads to the biggest feeling of freedom for the people that you work with, like our listeners, our clinic owners?
It's a great question. And the simple answer is it's the lifeblood of a business. And the more complicated answer is the business owner gets frustrated with the accountant because the accountant is saying you made a profit this year. And then you as the business owner are looking down at your bank account balance saying, but where's the money? And the accountant cannot explain in 2 sentences in 15 seconds, when you make a payment on that debt, not all of it shows up on the profit and loss. And if they just said that would explain 90% of the problem. But they don't. And it's the reason why is that you're both speaking the language of money, but you're speaking different dialects. That your accountant is speaking the dialect of the IRS and the tax code and trying to minimize what you have to pay to the government. But then you're living in the real world and you can't pay people with seashells and with love. You got to pay them with the cash that flows through your business. And so I'm sitting
seashells and love. That is something that I was like, but why can't we? Right? Wouldn't that be so much better? Right. Seashells and love. I'm going to remember that one, Howard. But yeah, I cut you off. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. So I'm sitting here as an interpreter between what your accountant is saying and what your bank account is saying so that everything matches.
So, but when you do that, from the realistic standpoint, you're just like, but I pay my bills and you're saying I made money, but it feels like I didn't have anything left over at the end of the day. It wasn't like there's this lump of extra cash there for me to do things. And I don't feel like I'm being reckless and, I'm not like wasting it on gambling or drinking or whatever. But you're saying, well, but when you become more financially led and you start thinking about things differently and where the money goes, then it changes your mindset. Just to let you know, I've talked to Howard before and he was like, I bet you could be debt free in 8 years. And he like asked me all these personal questions, like what's your debt? What's your car payment? What's your thing like this? And I told him, and he's not allowed to tell you guys on here, but at the end, he gave me a really great tip because I have a line of credit. And he was like, well, what you need to do is just change your thinking on that and how you pay your line of credit and what you're actually using for that. So there's all these little tricks that people can do to be debt free. It's just they kind of don't know about it. And one of the things that I was listening to you and you talked about that there's this one item that banks want people like our clinic owners to focus on, but it's actually the least impactful factor. Can you talk about that with us?
Yeah, 100%. And that is the interest rate. Everyone gets so tied up in terms of, oh, I have, a 3% mortgage on my house, or my student loans are under 4%. And so, Jennifer, let's just go through a little quiz. All right. You walk into a bank and you tell them, I'd like to take out a loan. And they say, great, we've got two products. One's at 4%, one's at 14%. Jennifer, which one would you like?
Oh, well, immediately I'm going to say, oh, I want the 4%. 14% is going to be for suckers. That's
100%. It's not a trick question. All right. But to get the 4%, you need to get full loan documentation, profit and loss, balance sheet, 2 years of tax returns. For 14%, can you fog a mirror? Does that change your mind?
Well, for 14%, if I didn't, I'm just having to get them data. I maybe didn't understand the question. I'm sorry.
So for 4%, you've got to give them all of this information.
Mm-hmm.
For 14%, basically, do you have a heartbeat? Does now the difference between the 4% and 14% change your mind? Or you're still going with the 4? Okay.
I'm still going with the 4, yeah.
All right. Here's the last two pieces of information. You're going to take the loan out for a year, and the loan is for $100. And so at the end of the year, on the 4%, you owe 104. On the 14%, you owe 114. Is the $10 really going to matter to you in terms of all of the documentation that you would have to get to save $10?
No, in that scenario, no. I probably would do the 114 on that one.
Yeah, and that's
because that seems a little to me, and I'm like, oh God, but this is hours worth of my time and effort. But we're not talking about $14 though, Howard. We're talking about, in some cases, tens of thousands of dollars, or doubling the original amount.
Agreed. And so then I walk people through 1,000, and then but 100,000. Now all of a sudden this starts to become meaningful. And so when you think about this in the bigger context, it's really not the interest rate that matters. It's the balance of the debt the interest rate is applied to that matters. And so if we have a way to be able to manipulate that debt from 100,000 to 50,000 to 10,000 to 1,000 really quickly, the interest rate becomes meaningless. Mm-hmm. And so you can keep playing the game by default and saying, I got to just find the lowest interest rate, or you play the game by design and say, how can I manipulate the balance of the debt so that I am paying less interest quicker, sooner, more efficiently, more effectively?
I get it. And so when we were talking about my line of credit, you were like, just put if you have a line of credit in your bank and it's tied to your bank account, when you get your check or any income that comes in, you just put it towards that line of credit you're constantly using and paying back from that line of credit. So that's always going to keep that interest rate down. Okay, now I get that.
Correct. And so let's just say, if we were going to use a chiropractic office, and let's just say they had a line of credit in place and they have $60,000 of that line of credit that they're using right now, but they collect 50,000. All right. And I know this is a little bit of a stretch, but just to bear with me, if they collected all 50,000 on the first of the month, and instead of leaving it in the checking account, they move it into the line of credit, well, they're crushing the balance of the debt down to $10,000. And now they're only paying interest on $10,000.
Yeah, but then what happens when their bills come out? So yeah, let's take that down towards the next month and the next month.
Right. So then when the expenses come due, and let's just say that it was $40,000 in expenses, you pull the $40,000 out when you need to pay all the bills off. And so the balance will slowly come back up, but it's amazing in terms of how much you can crush the amount of interest per day when you manipulate the balance. So this is what I try and teach people on the personal side. And I know this is in extreme numbers in terms of the 50,000 income, 40,000 expenses. But if we can just play the imaginary game, income came in on the first of $50,000. Expenses are on the 28th. That $50,000, again, we can put it in one of three places. We put it in the checking. We keep it in checking, we move it into a savings account, or we move it into the line of credit. Because the line of credit's an open-ended tool. It's not a mortgage where it's a one-way street. It's not your student loans. You make the payment, the money's gone. You make the payment, the money is still available. It's just sitting in a different account. But now we've lowered our balance. We've lowered the amount of interest we're charged because now it's just based on $10,000 for 27 days. And in our magical scenario, all of the expenses are on the 28th. Rent, credit cards, utilities, you only pay payroll once a month, and you pull $40,000 out. Well, now the balance will come up to $50,000, but now it's only for 3 days in that month. It's 27 days at 10,000 plus 3 days at 50,000 is dramatically less interest than keeping something at $60,000.
So in the long game, so this is where you have to think of terms in the long game, which is really hard for some people to be able to do. In the long game, you're saving money and you're going to be making more money in the end. And that is really different. So for lines of credit, so let's talk about this because there are going to be people that are on, been in business 30 years and they've never even heard of a line of credit. Can you talk a little bit about the various lines of credit that are available both to individuals and business owners?
100%. So let's start with the most common example, a credit card. Mm-hmm. Okay. A credit card is an example of a line of credit. It's a two-way street. Money moves in, money moves out. And so if we call up a bank and we get approved for a $10,000 limit, we purchase $3,000 of goods and services. At the due date, if you don't pay the $3,000 off, you still have $7,000 available in the line. I call that availability access to cash. But when you pay the $3,000 off, the full $10,000 is available again. So money flows in, money flows through. The two other common examples is number one, a business line of credit, since we're a business show here. The rule of thumb is 10% of your collections. So if you happen to be $1 million producer, I don't mean in terms of gross revenue, I mean in terms of actual collections, then you should be able to get a $100,000 business line of credit. The most common example is a home equity line of credit. And this is where this whole game started in terms of me figuring this out, is you can use the equity that's trapped in your home right now and now access it. And that will give you a larger emergency fund. It will give you peace of mind in case things slow down, because, not everything goes up and to the right. There's times when things, just don't look hot and you're like, I'm not taking a paycheck home this month. And it's like, that's not good because I've got other bills. This is your backstop. This is your buffer. But when things are good, then we understand how to play the game and pay this down quickly. And then we use this as an arbitrage tool to pay down your other fixed debt. A little bit hard to explain on a podcast, much easier to see if we draw it out, but that's what we're doing.
Yeah, that's just fascinating because we don't think of things like that, but that's how the world used to be. You know, we didn't have mortgages until like after 1917. There was no such thing of it. Your house was your credit. And the more that you paid on the house, the more money you actually had for yourself to be able to take out for that. So this, you know, the idea of HELOC or whatever, home equity line of credit, they didn't call it that then. That's what everybody had. Now it's considered new. And it's been, I guess, a little bastardized, you know, over the years to not be, you know, as good as it used to be. But yeah, we still have things like that. Where do you find, so I know that you had your own clinic and you were able, which I thought was amazing, to like 4x your revenue and to do different things, not 4x your revenue, but to change your own revenue with that. Can you talk a little bit, because you're in practice yourself, you're a clinic owner, you're like our target audience that listens to us, and how you were able, what made you decide to go from being, you know, in your own practice to utilizing this and changing and transforming your own life?
Oh, that's a deeper story. And so
Yeah.
I don't practice anymore. And the reason why is I just tell people now, sometimes life leaves you little clues and other times life hits you with a 2x4. My 2x4 moment was Sunday morning, Memorial Day weekend, 2018. Jaden, my older biological son, is 12 years old. I'm sitting next to his bed. He realizes I'm there and he says, "Dad." His voice is barely above a whisper. "Yeah, buddy." I lean over the bed. I put my ear over his mouth to make sure I can hear him. And he says 3 words I'll never forget. "Am I dying?"
Oh my goodness.
12 days earlier, Jaden came home with a stomach ache. 3 days after the stomach ache, we're in the ICU at the Children's Hospital having emergency surgery. It was appendicitis that turned septic, 29 days in the hospital, 19 of them in the ICU, 8 straight days of sedation because he went to the operating room 5 times. After they take the tube out of his throat, they give him methadone and morphine to bring him down from the drugs he was on. So my 12-year-old son looks like a heroin addict coming down from a high, and the very first question he will only ask me are those 3 little words. Am I dying?
I don't know. I can't even imagine. No, being a parent, that just, your whole heart would just be, it's like a fist goes into your chest and terror. Even if you know it's not true, still the fact that they feel that way and you love them so much.
Well, you have to remember, he didn't know. He was, the last thing he knew was that he went to sleep and 8 days later, he's now up. So he had no idea what happened. And so my first breath was, did I hear him correctly? My second breath was, do not lose it right now. I look him in the eyes. I tell him, no, you're not dying. You've had prayers from thousands of people all around the world and you're going to be just fine. He looked at me. He knew I was telling him the truth. He closed his eyes to get more rest. I walked outside the room and then I broke. I was miserable. I was burnt out from dentistry. I was taking it out on everyone around me. I was practicing 16 years at this point. But when I broke, only one thought seared into my mind. If life is this fragile and I'm unhappy with the path that I'm on, burn the ships, it's over. And that's what I did. I sold my practice September 2018, just walked away. Now,
that's the tough. I mean, I have clinic owners that come to us and they're like that. We try to get them back on track, but you know, some people are just at that point too. And for some of them, that's the right answer, you know? And so once you did that, how did you make the pivot to where you're at right now?
Yeah. So in this transition, I'm sitting with another dentist who asked me that question. How are you walking away? And I made one dumb comment to him, which changed everything for me. I kind of figured out how to make money move. Now, he gave me that Scooby-Doo look. I tried to explain things that day. Frankly, I just didn't do a good job. But a few weeks later, I get the next statement in the mail for my house payment. I take a picture of it. I send it to him as a joke. And I said, hey, take a look at this. My house payment was $24.19. And he writes back, I see it. I don't understand how you can have a $24 house payment. I'm buying a condo next month. Will you be my coach? Okay. Jennifer, he paid off the condo in 8 months instead of 30 years.
Yeah.
And
That's
so
amazing.
so he tells his business partner, I tell a friend of mine what happened. They become the next two people I help. And now instead of listening to my head, which said go to dental school, I'm listening to my heart, which says this is the way you're going to make an impact in this world, is by teaching people. I call it the new rules of finance, but the system around it so that they can get to their freedom sooner. However they define it, it's not for me to define it. It's for, look, if part of your thing is yacht, private jet, 3 houses all around the world, and that's your definition of freedom, great. How do we get there sooner?
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. And so, but there's all that, everything's changing so much right now. How do you stay ahead of all these new changes? I'm going to tell you just the like legal landscape on certain things in the last 8 years has changed. And now banking and things are changing. So how are you staying ahead of all that?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of put this as the risk factors to understanding the system. Some of it can be mitigated. And so here's kind of the 4 risk factors that I boil it down to. Number 1, you have to have the cash flow. It's just math when you boil this down. If income is not greater than expenses on a consistent basis, this will not work, period, end of story. Number 2, you have to understand the rate is variable. Okay. And that freaks people out because they're like, they can budget when they know this is the fixed payment and I can kind of work with that. I say, screw budgets.
Okay.
If you understand how the system works. Okay. And here's what I mean is that when the interest rates were low in 2021, my average house payment was $350 a month.
Wow.
In 2022, while the interest rates were increasing, my average house payment was $500 a month. For the last 2 years, while the interest rates were high, my average house payment has been $600 a month. And so I'm just going to ask you, which is easier to pay? My variable payment of $600 or your fixed payment of whatever it is, whatever in your mind? I guarantee you it's not $600.
Yeah, no, it's not $600.
Okay. And so, yes, the interest rate moving is a risk, but my monthly cash burn is less. And I'm okay with that because I accept the risk. The third thing is a line of credit can get closed. And this is what everyone goes back to. I thought in 2008, 2009, they were closing lines of credit everywhere. The answer is yeah, not really. See, you only hear the headlines from Mace Bank and Hell's Cargo and Crank of America and Capital One because they're the national banks. They're going to be the ones that get the headlines. And so I don't like working with them. I prefer to work with regional banks, community banks, credit unions, because they're your neighbor. They're in your economy. They don't make these rash decisions unless you're being stupid with the line. Then that's a problem, which then gets me to the last and biggest and most precarious risk of this is that you raid the piggy bank. I've got an acquaintance, and I use that term very loosely. At one point, the husband was part of the Watch of the Month Club, and I believe they still have a car lease payment of $1,300 a month. Okay. Now, the family does just fine. I could care less what they spend it on, but if you got them in a corner and you ask them why are you spending on this stuff? It doesn't take long to get to the truth, to impress our circle of friends. And so the problem with that is that there's no end game to that. So if I showed this couple the system, they would start it, they would raid the piggy bank, they come back and say, Howard, this doesn't work. I just look at them and say, no, you're just an idiot. You're an idiot that happens to make a lot of money, but you're still an idiot. And so you know you better than I know you. And if this idea of now having access to a giant wad of cash, your next immediate thought is, I'm going to go buy a Lamborghini. unless you already have the cash flow to justify the purchase of the Lamborghini, this is not the right system for you.
Yeah, but if you can be disciplined, even if it's just a tiny bit of cash flow, as long as you can discipline yourself and get a goal. A lot of it is just getting a goal and know that you're working towards a goal. Mindset with anything is going to be one of the most important things, I feel, with this, just like it is in business. And it is mapping out a goal. It's so easy to get on the hamster wheel of just taking care of patients and paying your bills and dealing with staff problems. And that's all you have time for. And you're exhausted all the time. When, if you said, what's your goal? And what are the 3 things you did today to get you to that goal? And you really can't answer that question. Not really, because you really aren't being purposeful with the goal setting, or it's just some pie in the sky thing that's not really connected to your heart and your soul, then you'll never get there. But if you can make that shift in your mind to be work with more intent and purpose, then it doesn't take much to start getting where you really want to go. At least that's my thought.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And so when I realized what the power of this was, I then had to step back and say, wait a second. I was a dentist. A lot of dentists I know are business owners. I wonder if I can play the game on the business side, because if we improve the business, then what does it do? It improves their personal life and it gets them closer to freedom. And so the first business that I did this with was not the dentist that paid off the condo in 8 months. It was a different dentist. Great practice, really great practice. But the long story short is he had $800,000 of practice debt for the next 7.5 years, and it was going to cost him $12,000 a month. And we paid all of that off in about 7 months at a total cost of $500 to save $12,000 a month in payments for the next 7 years. And now understand that $140,000 a year, that was at the bottom of the profit and loss. He already worked for that. But now he's got that $140,000 in his pocket to do whatever he damn well pleases.
Yeah, that's so hard for people to fathom, because the system that we're taught and the system we fall in is not this system. It is definitely the system of cogs and the big machine, and you stay in your place and you don't think outside the lines, and you just do this until you get sick, and then you're no longer useful and you will be replaced. I mean, that is really just this, we say, it's just getting educated that no, there's a whole other machines that are running out there that aren't on this system that are going to be different. Do you have anything else to tell us? I could talk to you forever, and we're already at the end. I always say this, but anything you want to leave us with before I tell them how to find you and all of our other stuff?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll just end with this, and that is, you can keep playing the game by default and saying, well, I've got to play by the rules. But if you play the game by design, have you ever thought there's really 2 sets of rules? The rules that the financial system is going to show you, and the rules that I'm now exposing.
That the same people in that system are using themselves.
100%. 100%.
Absolutely. Well, guys, we've been talking to Howard Polansky of Financially Led, and we have a really great ebook for you. So if you go to financiallyled.com/ebook, you can get to it, or just go to where you normally go, superclinicproject.com. And when you click on the follow the podcast, you can get right into our free school. It's right there on the landing page. We've revamped it to make it really easy for you. And then we'll have his ebook links and his bio and all the information about him and being a cash flow optimizer and financially led right there. Again, it is superclinicproject.com. I want to thank you again, Howard. We've been with Howard Polansky. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
You're welcome, Jennifer. Have a wonderful weekend.
You too.
You've been listening to the Super Clinic Project podcast. If you like what you hear, subscribe and stay tuned for further episodes of the Super Clinic Project podcast.